Good morning, everyone. Democrat policies continue to cause crises for every American family. We know that Democrats' tax and spend policies are causing historic inflation. Americans are paying more for everything thanks to President Joe Biden and the Democrats' reckless spending. For example, gas prices are up 45.1%. Used cars and trucks are up 45.2%. Fruit at the grocery store is up 7.3%. Milk is up 5.6%. And just yesterday, President Joe Biden showed the American people how truly out of touch he and his fellow Democrats are when he dismissed the concerns of hardworking Americans who are paying more for basic necessities. No, Mr. President, the American people are concerned because of your policies. Inflation has increased every single month of Joe Biden's presidency. Last month, 47% of small business owners said they were forced to increase prices. Key economic indicators are flashing red. The Consumer Price Index in June had the largest jump since before the 2008 financial crisis. And worst of all, if you compare average wages right now and account for inflation, Americans are actually making less than they did a year ago. Inflation is taxation. It is a tax on every American family, and it is a result of Democrat policies. And how are Democrats addressing these issues? By trying to ram through a partisan $3.5 trillion budget written by Bernie Sanders that will raise taxes on the middle class and further increase inflation. So today, I'm excited to be with my colleagues, Mario Diaz-Balart, who's going to give us an update on Cuba, Tony Gonzalez from Texas, who will give us an update on the border crisis, and our whip, Steve Scalise. So I will turn it over to Mario Diaz-Balart.
Thank you, Elise. Thank you so much. As you all know, the Cuban people have been under a repressive, totalitarian, terrorist, murderous regime for 62 years. And recently, last week, they took to the streets. And they took to the streets asking for one thing alone: freedom. Freedom. They're not out there asking for remittances. They're not asking for aspirin. They're asking and demanding freedom. And for that, for those peaceful demonstrations, they have been confronting the most dramatic repression that I think we have seen in decades. You've all seen, I hope, the videos and the pictures. The regime is sending uniformed and plainclothes thugs to beat up protesters. They're shooting people in their own homes. They're breaking into people's homes and shooting them. Something I never heard about. They're actually grabbing boys out of their homes by force and forcing those boys to participate in the repression of those who are peacefully demonstrating for freedom. And what is the response of President Biden? Some lukewarm words. But inconceivably, he has now announced a remittance working group to weaken sanctions precisely as the regime has asked for. That is what we are hearing from, again, this administration. The Cuban people, as I said before, they're not asking for remittances. By the way, let's be very clear, very few Cuban families have access to remittances. Particularly Afro-Cubans have very little access because they don't have a lot of family that can send them remittances. What the Cuban people are asking for is freedom. So what are we asking for this president to do? To unblock and expand internet access to the Cuban people, because that's been blocked off by the Cuban regime, and there's a lot that the United States can do there. This president said that he was going to be the new president of diplomacy in the world. Where is he? He should be demanding that the UN, that the OAS, that the EU, and all the other multilateral organizations and democratic allies denounce the illegitimacy of the Cuban regime, condemn the human rights abuses, and end trade with the Cuban military. This administration is also, by the way, pushing to lower funding for U.S. broadcasts into the island. Think about that. As he wants to increase funding on just about everything except for national security and defense, he also wants to decrease funding for broadcasts from the United States into the island, which the Cuban people are, by the way, now more than ever using to communicate with each other. And for those who say that the fault of the repression and the murdering of innocent Cubans, the fault of that is the United States trade embargo. Let me be very clear. the sanctions on the Cuban military, which is what they are, go away just with three things taking place on the island. Number one is free the political prisoners in Cuba. Is that something that's too much to ask for? Is that something that our colleagues, Democratic colleagues, don't support? Number two is allow for some basic freedoms. Freedom of the press, independent labor unions, political parties. Is that something that we don't support in the United States? Is that something that our colleagues, Democratic colleagues, don't support? And number three, start the process for free and fair elections. Then the sanctions go away in a day. So again, what we're asking for is real solidarity from the administration, President Biden's administration, not just empty lip service, and then looking at ways to eliminate or weaken sanctions. Mr. President, please, this is a historic moment. We need the President of the United States to lead and not look at ways of diminishing sanctions or helping the regime, which seems the only thing this president knows how to do.
Good morning, everybody. You know, today is a historic day. We launched, Blue Origin launched humans into space from just in my district out in West Texas. It's also a historic day because at the border, the crisis continues to spiral out of control. We've seen historic numbers continue to rise. Traditionally, during the summer, during the hottest months of the year, immigration flows go down, but that hasn't happened. They've only increased. We've seen almost 190,000 illegal apprehensions for the month of June. That number continues to rise. In Del Rio, yesterday, there were hundreds of migrants from Haiti, from Cuba, from Venezuela that were rushing to get in. The crisis has come to a boiling point. In that same breath, our Border Patrol agents are doing God's work, saving lives. In the Del Rio sector alone, 1,700 lives have been saved due to Border Patrol agents pushing forward in this humanitarian effort. In the sector next door, the Big Bend sector, they're putting up rescue beacons because it's so hot. Migrants are dying in the desert because of this crisis. And where is the Biden administration? On their 6-month anniversary, the Biden administration is nowhere to be found. They still won't highlight the fact that this border crisis is getting worse. And even worse than that, there is talk of Title 42 going away in the next few days. If that happens, you're about to see a historic record of immigration numbers skyrocket even more. You're going to see innocent people that are making this dangerous trek that are dying in the desert. Those numbers are continuing to grow. Not to mention the fentanyl that is come across. Not to mention the sheer number of apprehensions. Meanwhile, last week, the House Appropriations Committee passed through a $1 billion decrease for Border Patrol agents. So while record numbers were happening right before us, this administration is defunding Border Patrol as well as they're nowhere to be found. The crisis will continue to spiral out of control until leadership. This is about leadership. The president needs to lead. And it's up to us in Congress to make sure that that president shows up. I will continue to fight for communities along the border. I represent over 40% of the border. This crisis is continuing to spiral out of control, and something has to be done, and it starts with the President of the United States.
Well, thank you, Tony and Mario, for coming and bringing the passion that you display, fighting for freedom for the Cuban people, fighting to secure our border. Elise, appreciate the message that you've been honing in on, because House Republicans have been fighting for months to highlight this crisis at our southern border that was created specifically by Joe Biden's policies. When Joe Biden sent a signal out to open the border, when he became president, by getting rid of the Remain in Mexico policy, turning his back on the agreements that had already been negotiated, not just with Mexico, but by the Northern Triangle countries. They were all working to finally stop the flow of people coming in illegally, and now we see the doors wide open to the point where the drug cartels have operational control over America's southern border. It has got to come to an end. the drugs that are coming across illegally, flooding our communities with drugs like fentanyl, which are killing families all across America. The child abuse that we see with these caravans coming over, abusing these children, using them in their tools to try to open up our border and send a message that America will no longer control the southern border. This has to end, and President Biden can end it, but he's chosen not to. When you look at Cuba, it was heartwarming to see the people of Cuba going to the streets and, in fact, bringing the American flag through the streets of Havana to demand freedom, because the American flag still represents freedom all around the world. And unfortunately, here in America, you still see some people turning their backs on the American flag. But that flag stands for freedom for a reason. We need to be standing with the people of Cuba who want and demand freedom. They deserve freedom. But it wasn't because of COVID that they went to the streets, as the White House was suggesting. It was because of the oppression from a socialist regime. This administration can't say the word socialism because they've been embracing socialism for the 6 months that Joe Biden has been president. You could see it going on in the Senate right now with reconciliation moving through. Reconciliation is just a congressional word for President Biden and his socialist allies in Congress attempting to raise taxes and increase spending by trillions of dollars. And what has that gotten us? It's gotten us inflation. Families see this. Families are paying more for everything they buy when they go to the grocery store. Families are paying more because of Joe Biden's inflationary policies. The spending, paying people not to work, it's all having an impact. When families are trying to take a summer vacation and paying over 45% more for gasoline, it's because of Joe Biden's inflationary policies. If they try to rent a car, they're paying more because of Joe Biden's inflationary policies. So this week, as we recognize 6 months since Joe Biden became president, I would give him a grade of I for inflation. It's a real problem for families. It's a tax increase on families. And Joe Biden, by the way, promised he wouldn't raise taxes on hardworking families. And yet he already has, because inflation hits the lowest income people the hardest. It's a real problem created by Joe Biden's taxing and spending policies. It's already having a negative impact, and it's got to stop. And then one final point, because we've started the appropriations process. Last week, when Congress was not in session, the appropriators were here moving 7 different bills. You know, in Washington parlance, they call those minibuses. We call them bloated buses because it's bloated with government spending on things like increasing more IRS agents, which is not what we want to see. Policies like the Green New Deal, which will make things cost more. It'll raise energy costs for families, not just at the pump, but their electricity bills will cost more. And it'll ship good, hard-working, middle-class jobs out of America to foreign countries. That's what Speaker Pelosi pushed. They try to push amnesty. But you know what they got rid of? They defunded Border Patrol, as Tony Gonzalez pointed out, but they also gutted the Hyde Amendment. And this is incredibly sad and disappointing, because this has been for decades a bipartisan agreement where Republicans and Democrats came together since Henry Hyde in 1976 put protections in place in law to say that taxpayer funds shouldn't be used for abortion. And then in the Appropriations Committee last week, on a partisan vote, Democrats gutted the Hyde Amendment. Well, the House Republican majority is not going to stand for that, and they will not be successful. Speaker Pelosi and her allies will not be successful at gutting Hyde protections, but it's very telling that that's what their priorities are. Given unfettered power, House, Senate, and White House, what are they trying to do? They're trying to spend money like it's going out of style. They're trying to raise taxes on hardworking families and take taxpayer money and use it to fund abortions. Those aren't the priorities of the American people. House Republicans will stand up and fight for those priorities for families all across this country. And with that, I'll be happy to take some questions. Yes, sir.
With the coronavirus resurgent in a lot of conservative districts, what message do you have to colleagues of yours that have questioned the vaccine's efficacy and to voters who have refused to get vaccinated?
Well, for colleagues of mine, especially on the Democrat side, if you look even last year, you had Joe Biden and Kamala Harris publicly criticizing and questioning the effectiveness of the vaccines. And that's very unfortunate. I've been vaccinated. Many of my colleagues have been vaccinated. And the vaccine is safe, effective, and it's widely available all across the United States of America for anybody who wants to get it. And so I still have yet to hear Kamala Harris or Joe Biden apologize for publicly criticizing the vaccine, which they did many, many times. It's on video last year when Donald Trump was president, when through Operation Warp Speed, he put the mechanisms in place to create these safe and effective vaccines.
Are you telling constituents to get vaccinated?
Sure. Yeah, I've been vaccinated again, and I have high confidence in the process that was used to bring these vaccines. In fact, it's not only saving lives in America, but it's saving lives worldwide through American ingenuity. And by the way, when the Democrats bring drug price fixing, which they're trying to do through legislation, that actually makes it harder to bring life-saving drugs to market, which is why we need to stand up against drug price fixing.
Kevin McCarthy named his members to the January 6th Select Committee. In your view, what should their mission be? And do you think Speaker Nancy Pelosi should testify about security in the Capitol that day?
Well, there have been many questions raised about why there wasn't a higher National Guard presence. It was supposedly offered. At what level was that rejected? I would hope they would look into that because that question really hasn't been answered. How high up the chain did it go? Was it at the Speaker's level where they were offered National Guard protection on January 6th and denied it? But I know Leader McCarthy's been very vocal about this, as many of us have, that they need to look at the whole array of political violence that led up to January 6th and still has gone on after that. There was a Capitol Police officer killed after January 6th that Speaker Pelosi doesn't want to look into that seems to be motivated by political violence. So let's look at the whole array of political violence and what we can do to dial that down and get better control over it. So I hope they would look at that. Well, who they call and testify, let the members of the committee discuss that and debate that. But that answer to that question is one of many questions that's unanswered, and that is, at what level from the Speaker's office on down did they reject the offer for help from the National Guard?
With regards to Cuba, your reaction to the DHS secretary telling the Cubans not to come by water, that they would not be welcomed in the United States when you look at what's taking place at the border?
Think about what a disgusting message that was by the Biden administration to tell people from Cuba not to come here when they've opened up the southern border to people. It's not just from South and Central America. We've seen people on the terrorist watch list from Middle Eastern countries coming across the Rio Grande, as Tony Gonzalez talked about, as I personally saw when I went to McAllen, Texas, where you had a wide open border with people every day, still like they are right now, coming across, and our Border Patrol agents, who we embedded with, telling us that they're not even able to do their job because they're spending maybe 40% or more of their time babysitting kids that are coming across through the human trafficking at the border, and they can't stop the drug cartels, which they want to do, and they're not able to do that. And then what do they tell people who are seeking freedom, who are maybe being persecuted right now? Thousands of people are missing in Cuba who went into the streets. As Mario's talked about, there are people being murdered in their homes, and if they try to seek asylum and come to America, the Biden administration saying, don't come? What kind of message is that when he's opened up the southern border to people that are on the terrorist watch list coming across? President Biden needs to get his priorities straight as it relates to standing up against tyranny, standing up against socialism, and protecting America's southern border from drug cartels.
Last question.
Just getting back to the Select Committee, I know there's a lot of concerns about politics surrounding it, but what is your best hope for the Select Committee in terms of an outcome? And secondly, do you think it's appropriate to have members on this panel who objected to the election results?
Well, first of all, I would imagine there's some Democrats who have objected to election results because if you look at January 6th in 2005, for example, a majority of Democrats did not vote to certify the state of Ohio, which would have, by the way, flipped the election to John Kerry if they were successful, which, of course, they weren't. But ultimately, what should be the mission of this commission? Again, justice needs to be carried out, and the focus should be on facts, not on politics. And it seems like Speaker Pelosi has been more interested in politics with this, so that's very unfortunate. But ultimately, when the commission starts, we'll see if they actually get back to the facts. That's where they should be. Well, thank you all again, and we stand in strong support of the Cuban people who seek freedom. We hope President Biden is more vocal.